Hello, Detroit. Welcome to another episode of Authentically Detroit, broadcasting live from the Audio Wave Network studios here on Detroit's Lower East Side, powered by the East Side Community Network and sponsored by none other than the Ford Foundation. I'm Donna Givens, and today we are joined by two special guests, Kat Stafford, award-winning journalist from the Detroit Free Press, who's joining us now, and Chase Cantrell from Building Community Value, who will join us later in the podcast. Thank you for listening in and supporting our efforts to build a platform for authentic voices, real people on the east side of Detroit. We want you to like and subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you listen to. Remember, we drop a new podcast almost every Tuesday, although we've had a few growing pains these past few months and missed a couple episodes. We'll have a bye week next week, and we'll join you again on November 12th with Orlando back in town, back from Europe. His co-host seat is still a little bit shaky because I'm not used to having to take over this side of the work, having to plan everything, but we're just going to get excited that he's coming back from seeing the world. So, Kat, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
I'm really, really excited to have you here. We give you so many shout-outs on this show because you break so much news, and it's really important that not only truth be told, but truth be told from the perspective of a Detroiter who benefits or who experiences the outcome of whatever happens in our community. And so here you are.
Yes, thanks. And I just love that this is on the east side. This is my stomping ground. This is where I grew up. So it's really special to be here.
Okay, before we get started on all the exciting news, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I was born and raised in the city of Detroit. My parents, in fact, live like 10 minutes away from this studio off of Gratiot, that whole area near Connor. So that's where I spent a lot of my time. Grew up in the city, DPS student, and ended up going to Eastern. I spent a lot of time out there. After I graduated, I landed my first job at the Ann Arbor News, but I really wanted to come home to Detroit. And so I worked, and finally I landed my first job at the Free Press 5 years ago. It's crazy to think it's been that long since I've been here.
Oh, wow. Well, we're glad you're here. So when you say you went to DPS schools, what schools specifically? You know, in Detroit, we want to know what school.
Yeah. So I have a funny story. So actually, K through 8th grade, I went to a Lutheran school on the east side off of Chalmers. It was Mount Calvary Lutheran School. I still don't know how my parents found it, but that's where they put us. But it was a great experience. It was a small classroom right in the middle of the community, so it was kind of interesting. That's where I went K through 8, and then high school went to Cass Tech.
Okay.
9th through 11th grade. 11th grade was got in a little bit of trouble, and I actually ended up going to a school called Detroit. I can't even think of it, Detroit Technology. It was like inside of Pershing High School.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I went there. Lisa Phillips was the principal there at the time before she moved on to Cass Tech. So that's where I went to school. And that's why, whenever anyone asks me to speak to high school kids, I always love to do that just because I feel like my journey kind of parallels a lot of what our youth go through in terms of the things you see, the trouble you might run into growing up. So.
Yeah, we talked about forgiveness last week and how life is pretty unforgiving for Black young people. You make one mistake and that's it. In a lot of instances, you were able to recover and then some, and then you became, a successful journalist. But so many people, it seems, just don't.
Yeah, and that's something that I kind of would love to talk a little bit more about is my personal journey from my start to where I am now, because I think a lot of our youth don't get a chance to see themselves adequately reflected in the media oftentimes. A lot of the stories you see, it's another story of something that we is portrayed as doing something wrong. But how often do we see us as a success story, us, thriving and making a way out of the city, because it's possible, and there's so many of us that do it.
Right. Well, you're right. I think that there's a perception that you're in one of two groups. You're either in the group that is positioned to do well or the group that's positioned to fail. And you get on that one bandwagon and you're just going to end up there. There was a pediatrician, I've talked about this before, in Detroit, who one time said, I heard him say, and I was so disgusted, that he could look at a baby at birth and know what that child's life was going to be when that child grew up. And I thought, who do you think you are, God? Only God can determine, really, the fate of a human being. We have so much potential, untapped potential, and we can always overcome. We can overcome at a young age. We can overcome in middle age. There are people who've overcome in all different parts of their life. So I'm excited, first of all, by your transparency and sharing that. And two, by your desire to want to reach back to young people. So we're going to take you up on that and have you come talk to our young people at the vault, because they would be really honored to have you. We have a journalism program in the summer where we teach young people journalism. And I think that hearing from you for some of the young people would just be phenomenal.
Absolutely. And, you know, when I was growing up, I come from a two-parent household. And I've told you this before. My dad was the Block Club president of our neighborhood, Wilshire Block Club Association. I just remember that so well because he forced us to give out our newsletters early in the morning at 6 a.m. And, you know, I came from a two-family parent home, but even still, you know, I ran into a crowd and I just, you know, what so many teenagers do, you just skip class. That's pretty much what happened with me. And Cass Tech, you know, they have those strict rules. You better be in class. So, I mean, it was a learning experience for me, but because I had such a good foundation, I was able to rebound. So I tried to use myself to be an inspiration for other kids who might find themselves in a similar position. Right. Because like you said, so many of us, we get one shot and that's it. I was fortunate to have parents who gave me some tough love and told me, you're going to get back on the right path.
Right. And, you know, we have a lot of programs for young black men, a lot of programs where we're telling young black men they have a future, there are opportunities, a lot of focus on mentoring young men. I don't believe there's the same focus on mentoring young girls. I think that a lot of times young black women are seen as more successful and having more opportunity, but I look at a lot of our young girls as being very fragile. You look at sex trafficking and you look at the amount of domestic partner violence that's taking place and a lot of things that are happening to young women. And I don't know that we always step up in a big way for our young girls in the way we should.
Yeah, or even just the fact that it took a long time. I've talked about this with my colleagues. I'm very open about my journey growing up. Even just dealing with the things that you see growing up in a city like Detroit, growing up in the heart of the city, the things that I saw, the friends that I lost along the way, the friends who never, you know, quote unquote, made it out, and internalizing that. Even that I feel like there's not enough appropriate support to help children deal with that.
Yeah.
So,
you know, I remember working with young people. I'm not working as directly now as I was, but I remember working with young people and a friend would die, would be shot and killed, or there would be some other horrible tragedy, and it never made the news. And there were never grief counselors going to the schools, going in and helping young people cope with that. Young people would put on RIP T-shirts and make that up and cope almost invisibly. And we had a forum when I was at Vanguard. We brought some news media there, and we had a forum. And the message I think I got from some of the journalists who were there was that gun violence was kind of expected among African-American men. And you look at the amount of attention and trauma every time there's a gun death right now impacting white kids. And there's a disproportionate focus on the tragedy of gun violence when it's white kids doing it.
I have said this, even watching the presidential debates, whenever we have a discussion about gun violence, it's always about mass shootings, which I understand it's a grave thing to happen. It's something that deserves attention, but there's violence happening right now in our communities. And I feel like young children, women of color, black women, let's say black women, when we are victims of crime, of violence, where are we? Where are we in the headlines? Where are our names? Right. And I feel that the media does not do a good enough job covering crime in a holistic way, or even showing the victims in a humanizing way.
Right. And even showing the perpetrators
right.
in a humanizing way. When a white male goes and shoots up 40 people, we learn all about his psychological state, his family background, what might have gotten him on the wrong path, because there's this expectation that he's on one path, but he did not He should not have turned out to be a shooter. And when a young black man kills somebody, it's almost like, well, that's just what they do. We're not trying to understand the psychology behind all of that. There have been times when young people have died, and, for some reason I go on Twitter and I look to try to find the stories behind the young people. Not being a journalist, I don't have anywhere to report the stories, but just trying to understand what happened just prior to that. And it's fascinating, and I don't mean that in any good way. But a lot of times you're seeing a lot of emotional pain young people are in, whether they're the victim or the perpetrator, that just precedes the crime, the trauma, and the loss of everything. And when a young white man kills, 40 people or 12 people or 10 people, or maybe, only maims 11, he's destroyed his life and killed and annihilated a whole group of people. And so I don't think he should be the source of sympathy. But I think that if you really want to look at gun violence in a real holistic way, you've got to look at gun violence as a mental health and public health disorder. It's not something that healthy people do.
And again, I feel like it also goes back to who is covering these stories, who are in these newsrooms. And that's why I am always yelling, I feel like, about the lack of diversity, inclusion, and really equity in newsrooms in terms of who's making the coverage decisions, who's covering it, who are the editors, who are the photographers. And I feel like that is also the cause as to why you see a lot of this happen. One of my friends that I lost, her name was Crystal. We were just in high school, and I'll never forget when the principal came in and told us she died. She died on Mack and Buick, which is right down the street from here. And we moved on. But years later, again, it wasn't until that moment I felt I'd never dealt with it. So again, I would love to see more services in the city of Detroit dedicated to children and helping teens and our youth move past a lot of the trauma that they see.
Now, CNN is starting a Black News Network or a Black News newscast, and I've seen that there's going to be another Black News Network, and we have the Michigan Chronicle still. Do you think, though, that there's still a need for Black-owned, Black-produced, and edited media?
Absolutely. Because, who can cover you better than your own, right? Mm-hmm. And I know some people in the industry don't like that idea. They feel that anyone can cover anyone. And it's true, a journalist, when you are taught, you should be able to go into a community and be able to empathize and cover. But I feel that we need to have more Black journalists, especially in a city like Detroit that is 79% African American. We need more of our voices.
Well, I want to talk to you in a minute about the big story that you just, broke. And that was like, wow, look, this young Black woman is willing to and has the courage to take on the city and demand answers. And that says a lot, because I don't know if you've noticed, you probably have, how quiet Facebook is as these stories break. People aren't necessarily saying a whole lot. The same usual suspects are. But, people get intimidated when it's a story about the mayor. And yet there you are breaking that story.
Wow. I just feel that growing up in the city and having a different perspective, potentially, as opposed to some of my colleagues, I just feel that these are the types of stories that I want to tell, whether it's a story about an issue coming out of City Hall, whether it's something about water shutoffs, whether it's something about the city's demolition program. These are issues that I think directly impact the residents of Detroit, and they need to be covered.
What is the saying on the Washington Post? That democracy dies in darkness. And so you're shining a light. But I commend you for shining that light. Now, the thing that I thought was super interesting is that there was another Free Press reporter when Kwame Kilpatrick was mayor, and his name, M.L. Elric, as you know, was that voice. And so here I am looking at you, breaking a story. I don't know if this story will ever get as big as that one did, but it's a story about misconduct of the mayor and some lack of transparency. And I don't know if it rises to the level of a legal violation, but it's not how many of us would like to see the mayor performing, where a favorite is selected and things are done, and certainly not where emails are erased. So, at any rate, I want you to talk more about what the content of the story. But before we get into that, what I thought was super interesting was when I read something that M.L. Elric wrote, where he was kind of looking at the story and adding some context, saying, look, I think that this mayor is doing a lot of good. And, these things are wrong, but I think you have to look at it in this backdrop. And I thought that was really fascinating that he saw a need to defend the mayor before kind of supporting the story that you broke in a newspaper, the same newspaper where he broke a story about another mayor and provided none of that balance and none of that context. Now, there are many people who believe that Kwame Kilpatrick, Mayor Kilpatrick, deserves to be in prison, not for 28 years, but deserves to be in prison, but at the same time thought he did a lot of good. And we're able to balance that narrative. And yet here you have the same reporter who went out and felt very comfortable attacking the mayor, kind of defending this mayor. Did you see that?
Yeah, and I think Elric, he has a lot of strong opinions. He's been sharing those opinions since the Free Press first started pursuing these stories. But he's entitled to his opinion. And I feel like at the end of the day, I am grateful that the Free Press has an editor now who has been at the paper for about 2 years, Peter Bhatia, who supports me and my colleague Joe Guillen in doing these types of stories. He supports us 100% along the way. And that's all I really focus on. At the end of the day, what matters is to me is that I have the proper support who allows me to pursue these stories. And Elric, I mean, if he has these opinions, those are his opinions. It's not going to change what I do.
Well, and it shouldn't. But I think my point is that when you talk about having people from Detroit, Black people from Detroit, reporting on stories from Detroit, the significance is that when you look at Black people, you're able to look at Black people from a perspective of wholeness and not completely demonize in the same way that I see some white journalists doing, who really believe and act as though Kwame Kilpatrick is the worst criminal in the 21st century. And it's like, we have a list of people who've done things worse, but whenever you even raise the prospect of him being released from prison, oh, no, he should never be released from prison. He's the worst thing ever. But then we'll support somebody who has many similar characteristics. I'm not going to say the same, but I am going to say that there are some similar characteristics in other political figures without naming any, right?
Yeah, and I think, honestly, a good example of this is with Congressman John Conyers passing yesterday. Just a lot of the feelings and emotions that I've seen from a lot of people that I know in terms of how his death is covered versus L. Brooks Patterson's death, and a lot of the memories that were shared about Patterson when he died. So I think it goes back again to the need to just have more voices that can really show all perspectives, that can show a fuller picture of how people are really feeling in Detroit. That's what I feel is lacking.
Right. So before we get into the story, how was your weekend? Did you have a good weekend?
Yes, it was a long week. A lot of hours worked.
What are you working on now? Anything you can share with us?
I'm working on a couple special things. I got that fellowship from the Ida B. Wells, type investigations. It's the Ida B. Wells Fellowship, in the name of Ida B. Wells, of course, which was this pioneering African-American journalist. And I'm using that to work on housing issues. I'm going to be doing this big project on housing issues that will start unfolding in the next couple of months. So
I am so excited about that work. Housing is a human right, isn't it?
Yeah.
And yet many people do not enjoy that full right to live in quality housing, not now, but many of our people have never really enjoyed a right to quality housing in any city in America.
I agree. And we have so many issues in the city of Detroit right now. We've talked about this with affordable housing, or people who do live in housing, but they might not have access to water, which is another basic human right. So, we have these very serious issues that just frankly need to be covered much, much more by our local media.
I agree. And we're going to talk about some of the housing stuff when Chase gets here. He'll be here soon. While we're waiting for him, can you share anything about the story that you broke? What motivated you to write about it, and can you summarize what you found in investigating the Make Your Date initiative?
Wow, so it'll be November Friday, right? So it'll be almost a year since me and my colleague Joe again started really investigating this. It was a year ago. This all came up after, of course, now the infamous situation where local businessman Robert Carmack drove around City Hall with these big displays showing that video of Mayor Duggan, what appeared to be visiting Dr. Sonia Hassan's house. Now, we reported that, but it took us several months before we actually wrote that initial investigative story. And that was because we wanted to, one, do our due diligence before we named this woman. We wanted to make sure we had everything lined up because our names are on the story. So that first story broke, and we reported that we found that this Make Your Date organization received $358,000 from the city in grants to help women reach their due date. Now, this story has taken a lot of twists and turns over the past several months, and the major thing that happened was when we were moving forward with the investigation, we got a tip from a former city employee who told us that emails were deleted in connection with Make Your Date. And that's when this story really took a huge turn. And as you saw on Monday, this report that came out from the Inspector General basically found that the mayor did give preferential treatment to this organization because he did not solicit any other bids or seek out any other organizations, but the report did say he did not abuse his power of authority. But what she also found was that Chief of Staff Alexis Wiley did abuse her authority by ordering staff members to delete emails. So, I mean, this was a pretty big report to come out. And as you saw, the mayor had a press conference later that week, basically denouncing the findings. He found a lot of issue with it. But interestingly enough, he decided to decline Inspector General Ha's recommendation to discipline Wiley and the two other staffers who followed through with her order to delete emails.
He said that he was worried about that she was doing it out of concern that it would embarrass some junior employees.
Yes, that was his reasoning.
So how would junior employees be embarrassed by supporting Make Your Date?
The mayor said they didn't want these junior staffers' names to be dragged through the media, and they felt that they didn't want them to be at the forefront of this. But again, as a reporter, we are trained and we know that you do not delete emails. Everyone who's trained with FOIA, you know that you should not be deleting emails.
So Alexis Wiley is a trained reporter, correctly?
Right. She, I believe at one time worked for Fox 2 for quite some time.
So do you think that she knew that you weren't supposed to delete emails?
I'll say this. I think, again, as an investigative reporter, for which she was, I believe that as we go through schooling, as we go through training, that is one of the things that we know. We know FOIA laws. We know that emails should not be deleted.
So explain to me, if an email is deleted, is that improper or is it illegal?
Well, there is a Michigan law that if you delete emails that are of a public nature, that is a misdemeanor. I believe you can face up to 2 years in prison, maybe like $1,000 fine. So it is an illegal act via state of Michigan law.
Okay. So now the state attorney general, Dana Nessel's office, is evaluating this, or has she finished her evaluation?
So there are two separate things that were going on at the state level via Attorney General Nessel. One, she was looking wholly at the nonprofit itself. That's done. That's completed. The part that's still ongoing is the actual criminal investigation. Because as we were reporting this during the course of our investigation, 2 city employees actually came forward, made complaints, and that's what she is looking at right now. These two complaints allege that staffers were ordered to delete emails in connection with Make Your Day. So that investigation is ongoing right now.
So, to draw a national parallel, you have a president of the United States who literally tried to hide evidence of a phone call, right? And is saying, well, that phone call didn't happen, and there were some people who observed that happening, and we now know that he was trying to pressure Syria. I'm sorry, pressure the Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden and his son, and also to investigate the investigation that led to his, the grand jury investigating him. Excuse me. So it was a political thing. But I think that in the course of all of this, we learned it's more than Syria. Syria is just the thing that somebody came forward on. Do you believe that the same type of actions might be taking place in city government outside of Make Your Date, where information is hidden and emails are deleted to control the narrative in the city, or do you believe it was an isolated incident?
That's a great question, and that's something that I've seen a lot of people talking about. It's hard to say. I don't know, but I do appreciate the fact that a lot of people are sharing their thoughts with me privately, some of which I'll be pursuing, a couple tips that I'm receiving. But here's the thing, we've had a couple editorials. We ran an editorial, the news had an editorial, and people are saying that when something like this happens, transparency is eroded. Government, trust in by the public is eroded when something like this happens. And I feel like that's the real concern here, is how does this impact the public? Again, for me, that's all I care about as a reporter, is sharing this information with the public and letting the public themselves decide for what they want to make of it.
Yeah, I mean, public trust controls everything. If you don't trust in your government to be transparent, to be fair, to make decisions that are not biased based on personal relationships or personal benefit, whatever that benefit may be, it's hard to trust a lot of the big decisions that are out there. Right now, you have a number of areas where the mayor is looking for the community to weigh in and support things. And I wonder if this example of destroying emails, attempting to destroy emails, they didn't get destroyed, they were on the server and they got recovered, but attempting to destroy emails, even the use of personal versus, professional email, I wonder if any of this will impact how people in Detroit view the leadership of this city.
That's a great question. And I think that especially, just looking at the fact we have this $250 million bond initiative that's on the table right now that council is set to potentially consider tomorrow. In fact, I think when you have that and when you have this happening, I think people are raising questions. What does this mean when you look at the bigger picture? What does this mean now that we have an administration that's coming toward us with yet another ask for more money? Can we trust this leadership? And that's something that I and other reporters are hearing. And, all I can do is do what I've been doing and raise the questions as they're posed to me and keep reporting the truth.
Well, I want to talk about, and I'm trying to wait for our next guest, for Chase to get here to talk a little bit about the Blight bond, because I have some very strong opinions on it. And I definitely want to hear from you what your thoughts are on the Blight bond. Maybe before we get started, you could share with us a little bit about some of the other investigations that you've done that have been significant in the recent past.
So last July, that was kind of my first large investigative piece, and that was a look at the lack of diversity in the demolition contracts in terms of the lack of minority and Black participation. So we had this huge influx of money coming into the community, hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funds, and I was curious. I just wanted to see, of that number, how many of these companies were either locally based or how many were African American or minority. So literally went through tens of thousands of demolition records to see who got each and every single contract dating back to 2014, and I found that of the hundreds of millions that had went to these companies, just 16% had gone toward Black-owned companies. And I think the number rose to maybe 20 to 23% when you factor in other minority companies. And it had a lot of people in my story who were raising concerns about this because this was the largest influx of federal dollars that had come into the city in recent memory. So that was a really big investigation. And a couple months after that, we started to see more Black contractors get contracts. But that's just a start. I mean, I'm still hearing concerns and issues, and I'm sure we'll talk more about the bond, but one of the concerns that Council President Brenda Jones has is this very issue. How do we make sure that if this bond moves forward, that it'll be equitable?
Well, I come at it from a completely different perspective, and it looks like Chase is walking in right now. But when you look at diversity, I think that when you centralize control of a resource, you automatically limit the diversity. When you've decided that this is the only way we can spend the money is by walking through this one door, then people have to get qualified to walk through that one door. So I really want to talk about other ways that we could get at some of the same things. But we're joined by Chase, and we're really excited to have Chase Cantrell for building community value. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
And we're talking about the Blight bond. And so I have a question for you. Can you build community value through demolition?
By demolition alone, you cannot, right? You have to have a lot of other things that go along with that to actually build community value. And by community value, I would mean not only just economic value, but true value in the community, right? Bringing people together, reconnecting our communities, bringing back the kind of communities that we once knew in the city of Detroit. So you need a lot more than just demolition. And this demolition bond falls short in a lot of ways with that.
I agree. So, I'm a Detroiter. We're all Detroiters in this room, right? And when houses get torn down, I never hear people like, yay, all the houses on my block are gone. People may be glad the Blight is gone. I don't want to minimize the fact that nobody wants to live next to an open, abandoned, burned up house. That's really, really traumatic. Mm-hmm. I want to deal with the fact that that house was, in many instances, open and abandoned and burned because of bad policy, not because of bad neighbors or bad people who used to live there, but bad policy that drives the abandonment of property, whether it is bad tax policy or bad banking policy that allows banks to sell predatory loans, or bad policy in the 1970s and 1980s that allowed for the outflow of population to the suburbs, and also prevented the meaningful reinvestment in the city of Detroit. So you have this bad policy driving abandonment and blight in the city.
And it's more than just the idea of policy, right? It's not some passive thing that doesn't get created by someone. It's a systemic devaluation of communities of color, not only in the city of Detroit, but across the nation, right? Yeah. So it's the kind of policy that was put into place to really hurt Black communities, Black and brown communities. So when we talk about this idea of demolishing buildings, it's more than just the built environment. It's really the ripping apart of communities that we've seen for the last century in Black and brown communities across the United States. So that's what we're seeing in Detroit. And when we hear the same narrative of, whether it's blight removal, whether it's clearing out slums, whatever the language is that you use, we have long memories in our communities, and it means the same things. And unless you're coming in with other economic resources behind it to build back up these communities, you're going to have the same result that we've seen before.
I saw the presentation before City Council where the city was basically saying, hey, look, all these people in the past tried to resolve blight, and they tried, and they tried, and they tried, and nobody has been successful, but we have a good plan. And it's like, I'm sure that's what Mayor Cobo was saying some time ago, okay? But the reality is that slum got created by racism. That slum got created by realtors and banks and white people not wanting Black people to live among them, and a failure to invest. And so it's just interesting to me that a couple years ago, Mayor Duggan was at Mackinac talking about all of the past racist policies that contributed to the blight that
That's
we
right.
see in Detroit. People acted like racism ended in 1970. And we had predatory lending that targeted our people in our communities in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and yet we still act like this is something new. And so going back to that blight bond, and back to the whole issue of inclusion, so then you have a whole industry that gets wealthy as a result of a problem, the racism. So the author of the book, Race to Profit, the author refers to this construct called predatory inclusion. That once inclusion happened, the policies were created in such a way that they were predatory in nature and not investment in nature. There was no building up of Black wealth. And so when you came in, I was just talking about this whole concept of centralizing an asset. If the city really wanted to build value in communities or remove blight, it could possibly mean that the city would give contracts to various people, various organizations, and small businesses that would do various things inside of the neighborhood to fix up the neighborhood so that the neighborhood had a holistic reinvestment strategy and not the one thing, which is demolition. What do you think about that, Kat? The concept that diversity in use of the resource means more than bringing in Black subcontractors or Black contractors. It means it's bigger than that.
I think that's an interesting idea, and I think that's something that I've heard people float over the past couple of years. Is there a better way to do this aside from, like Chase said, just tearing down these houses? I think that's a valid question, especially when let me back up. A lot of the reporting that I've done has really centered on the issues that we've seen in this program. I mean, I've covered some stories where contractors are tearing down the wrong houses, where contractors are literally burying the materials from a house instead of taking them away like they're supposed to. So many issues have been reported: asbestos, lead concerns. I mean, the list goes on. And I think before this bond even gets to the people, I think a lot of people are looking to council to ask a lot of these questions. What quality controls are you going to have in place to make sure nothing like this happens?
Or the asbestos doesn't get sprayed in the neighborhood because you forgot to remove it. My bad.
Exactly.
Your health. My bad. But I mean, what I'm saying is that if we considered giving grants to organizations to fix up some of these houses as opposed to tearing them all down, the only way the city is looking at investing in homes right now through this blight bond is, I believe, 1,000 homes will receive about $20,000. The land bank will receive about $20,000 to fix up about 1,000 homes and then sell them for about $100,000. And what the city says is, well, this only works in the strongest neighborhoods, strongest meaning wealthiest, but I love the language they use, in the strongest neighborhoods. But we believe it can be used in other neighborhoods once blight is cleared out. The problem with investing $20,000 in a home that will be sold for $100,000 is that that price point exceeds the average purchase power of an average Detroiter. And so you're not fixing up the homes of the people who are here. There's no diversity. There's no real talk about making these homes accessible to low-income people or moderate-income people in the city. Instead, the only pathway is a very narrow pathway where one public entity, the land bank, controls the resource and how it's used, or another public entity controls demolition and how it's used. And I'm not sure that's the best use of these dollars.
I think, again, that is a valid point. You know, just last weekend or so, I was on the west side in this neighborhood, and there's a woman. I don't want to give her name because she's part of my fellowship. But she has pretty much taken a part of her community and repurposed these homes that were abandoned on her street, and has really turned it into like one house is like a tutoring center, another house is like a place where people could come and get food. And I see this community that she's been able to build. And it makes you wonder, well, can you replicate something like this across the city? I mean, there are people on every side of the city who are invested in their neighborhoods, who want to put in the work, who are willing to put in the work to revitalize their own neighborhoods. So I think that's an interesting thought.
Yeah, given the track record of injustice, justice has to look like something more than the same.
Well,
and Chase, I want to bring you in on this. What were you going to say? And then I have another question.
Sure. So when I think about the students who come through building community values, and one of the things that my organization does is we teach about real estate. So Detroiters who are interested in doing real estate development in their neighborhoods, we give them the tools to do that. And the first day, we have people come up to the front of the class and say why they wanted to take the course. And most of these folks are, you have to be a Detroit resident, Detroit, Highland Park, or Hamtramck, but people are passionate about their communities. They've been there for a long time. They've seen houses being torn down, right? They've seen the structure of their communities being ripped away slowly, and they want to do something about it. And a lot of them have the desire. Many of them even have the knowledge, but the main thing that they don't have, even after the course, is capital. And being able to access the capital to actually do the work that they have the skills to do is the hardest part. So that's really where a lot of this ideation and innovation needs to come. Yeah. Like, how do we get Detroiters the capital to do the work in their own neighborhoods?
I agree. Something gets me really excited is this concept that we can train young people in housing, rehab stuff, all of the skills related to housing rehab, give them a job, an employment skill, and at the same time, let them fix up their homes through materials we give them so that they can own homes free and clear or for very little loan dollars. That's innovation, right? And I know a couple young people who've already started doing that on their own. They just have figured out, I know how to put up a drywall. I know how to put a door on. I know how to put windows in. And they learn. It takes them a long time. And but when at the end of the day, they become homeowners. And it's no longer, I'm a homeowner predicated on my wealth. I'm a homeowner predicated on my willingness to work and my access to capital. And so we have an opportunity to create multiple pathways to ownership. I'm not saying don't sell homes for $100,000. Some people may want to sell homes for more. I'm just saying there needs to be multiple pathways in order to have justice in Detroit. And I think that there would be people who would be widely embrace that. Chase, you and I have been looking at this legislation, right, for the past couple of weeks. Can you share specifically what you think is wrong with the Blight bond proposal as it's currently constructed?
So I don't know how much background you gave before I arrived, but okay. So the city is asking to really sell these bonds up to $250 million. So that's an up to amount, maybe a little bit less and maybe 225. So there's been some question about what the true amount is, but of that 250, only 60% is for residential demolition. So you have 60% for residential, 20% for commercial, and 20% for other. So the other is tree removal, taking down fences, whatever else that the city needs to do, but really only 60%. So although we're talking about this being a blight bond for residential demolition, only 60% of it is for that purpose. So
there's also commercial demolition in there too, right?
That's another 20%.
Okay, right.
So at the council table, in much of the legislative policy division's analysis, they really haven't talked a lot about the commercial. That hasn't been the focus. The focus has been residential, even though it's only a portion of the full amount. So I'll start there. But beyond that, so this is a general tax obligation bond. So it's predicated on the taxes that Detroit residents are paying. 75% are interest-free, 25% are require interest. Tax-free. If for some reason we don't meet the IRS's requirements over time, we could end up paying more. So what's happening at the city council table is they're asking David Masseron and Arthur Jemison some pretty challenging questions about, you're really asking Detroit residents to trust you on this. Despite I think, Kat, you were talking about some of the issues that have happened. You're asking Detroit residents to trust that the right processes are in place, that you fix the problems in city government, that when we create this new demolition department, which has been proposed, so this is taking it away from the land bank and bringing it in-house, creating a new department, that we can trust that this new department can actually manage the process correctly to make sure that at the end of the day, this is a 30-year obligation. So Mayor Duggan will no longer be mayor. A lot of these actors will no longer be around. At the end of the day, Detroiters are holding this bill. Can we trust that the right processes will be in place? So I think that's been one of the greatest issues so far. Also, thinking about, as we were talking about before, is this just for demolition? Is this also for rehabilitation? What else comes along with it? Are we just tearing down structures without a plan? So the planning department, the head of the planning department, Arthur Jemison, talked about the fact that we're going to be doing planning as we go along over the next 5 years. So, there are 15 neighborhood plans already, in process. He plans to do more, but this is not the full city. So we're planning for more neighborhoods. We're not planning for all neighborhoods. What effect does that have on neighborhoods that are experiencing high levels of demolition, especially, thinking about the east side where we currently are, the Lower East Side. So those are some of the larger framing issues that really, if you think about the questions that city council members are posing, the questions that community members are posing, executive directors of community development orgs, like those are the questions that are being posed.
There's 21 of us, the
There are
Detroit
21.
And we've come together and we have put together a policy statement that says that we understand the need for blight removal, but at the same time, the Detroit 21 believes that you need to balance that with planning, resident-driven planning, not just planning. You don't want residents coming together reacting to what the professionals say, but planning that emanates from residents getting there saying, these are the strengths of our neighborhood, here's what we want to see, and making sure that when we are prioritizing housing, it's housing for people like us, right? And I see a lot of people with these T-shirts, development without displacement. There is a real concern about displacement. So that's, one of the things. We also talk about not really setting a dollar amount. You don't know if it's 19,000 structures you need to tear down. With all of the demolition that's happening, we need to tear down just about as many houses today as we did when we started. Mm-hmm. So demolition does not have a net positive impact. We've got to stop feeding the land bank through tax foreclosures, right? And that means a moratorium on tax foreclosures or some way to forgive tax debt for low-income people. If we can forgive it for billionaires, can we forgive it for poor people? And then also, we just want to see investment in new housing development and owner-occupied home repair in housing rehab. Now, the city will say that when you invest in projects that benefit private parties, that you cannot use a tax-exempt bond for that purpose. You can only use a taxable bond, and so it will be more expensive. But what the city is not promising is that they're going to sell 75% of the bonds as they've written as tax-exempt bonds. That's a goal. It's not a promise. And so it could be that these bonds end up being taxable bonds and you still don't have investment in private entities. And if you could make it work with taxable bonds, they seem to be saying you can, then the concern about investing in private things that benefit private entities should go away or at least be somehow modified by that. Now, there have been, when you and I talked a couple months ago, because there were demolitions on the street that you grew up on. Mm-hmm. And all of these demolitions happened, and the first thing that struck me was they were all like $26,000 each.
Yeah, and I think...
and all by one company, right?
Yes. And I think, in fact, a different story that I wrote, I think the one I was referencing about the company that was burying the houses, essentially, I think they were paid $45,000 to tear down a single-family home structure. So you're seeing a lot of these prices just shoot through the roof for some of these structures. And, as a reporter, I'm like, well, what's the reason that a single family house will cost this much to demolish? Oh, it's the asbestos, it's the abatement.
Right. But we're not able to verify that that's a reasonable cost. We have gotten used to the fact that costs doubled and now it's exceeding the doubling and we're just supposed to be in this trust me mode. And again, I'm not. But the other thing is the sidewalks, right? So they did not put sidewalks in on the houses on your block.
Right. And it took them, how long was it before I just recently noticed a fresh sidewalk in front of where these houses were. And for me, growing up in this neighborhood and seeing all of these houses just go through this process of a family moves out, then it starts to slowly look abandoned and the windows are busted out. It's just like, it's like ghosts. Like, these are families that once lived there. These are families that I grew up with, kids that I played with. And so when the mayor, he was on Flashpoint on Sunday, and I think Devin Skillion asked him something about demolition and the concerns, the mayor essentially said, I wish a lot of these reporters who covered and write these types of stories live next to abandoned houses. Well, I did.
Well,
I know what it's like to live in these neighborhoods next to these. And I think that the fact that people are raising concerns about how this program is ran, it doesn't mean people don't want the blight to come down. It just means they want the processes to be in place and done correctly.
right. So I was watching the city council meetings like 4 hours last week, right?
It was.
And it was at, it was in the auditorium. They had a lot of people there. And I didn't get through the whole thing, I'm going to be really honest. I have not had a 4-hour block of time to myself since last Tuesday. But I watched a little bit of it. And the part I stopped on, I really regret I had to stop there, was you had all of these people getting up and demanding that council pass this blight bond. I was like, whoa, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. And then at some point, somebody stood up there making the strong case, and Councilman Tate said, well, I know the mayor paid for your parking and bought you all lunch, so you came down here. But before we get into that, I need you to listen to the whole thing. Did you hear that?
So I didn't. I only heard the council presentation after the comments.
Oh, yeah. Well, you had to listen to that one. I was like, that's spicy. But I had a meeting, and so I had to end the spice and go to my meeting. Unfortunately, I have a day job. And so, but I was like, wow, this is really interesting because it's an attempt to stack the deck. But here's the thing. When I talk to people in neighborhoods, number one, there are many people who want to see individual homes come down. When I first got to ECN, what I started hearing from people is, when are you going to build my neighbor back up? I need new houses in my neighborhood. My neighborhood feels like a ghost town. Quit telling me about investing in green space. I want neighbors. The other thing I hear more often than anything from anybody is the need for home repair, especially senior home repair resources. That you have people on limited incomes living in these homes and unable to maintain them. And I've heard some people say, well, they shouldn't live there. But it's interesting to me because I've also heard residents say, I pay taxes. Why do I pay taxes if you will not invest in services in my home? I can't get a sidewalk on my street. I can't get trees taken down, but I'm paying taxes. I can't get home repair, and I've been paying taxes for 60 years, fixing up the lot across the street, the lot next door to me, the lot behind me, doing everything I can to maintain this neighborhood. So at Eastside Community Network, we see it as our responsibility to give those people both voice and bring them together to try to create a sense of power, that we will talk back to government and push back and not be afraid. Because there is the silence of fear. People are afraid to speak out, afraid to make this city angry because maybe I will be punished and I won't get that contract, or the mayor won't talk about me during his, state of the city address or whatever it is that makes people feel special. But the reality is that I think there are very few people like me, community development leaders, who are really empowered by the city to move things forward. It's almost like there's this pretense of power because you're recognized, or people speak to you, or they invite you to the mayor's house when he gets ready to announce these things, but it doesn't feel like there's real power. I'm wondering, is there any way that the community can work with you to get some of those voices heard and to push back against these curated narratives that the mayor is trying to push?
My inbox is always open. I love, the best part of my job is talking to people, going out in these neighborhoods where it's like, oh, I remember 15 years ago, my friend lived here. So it's funny talking to someone who lives a couple doors down. The best part of my job is talking directly to residents, hearing their concerns and giving a voice to them. Sometimes some of the things that I hear from people, I don't even write stories about. I just connect them with the right person in the city because they can't get someone at the land bank to give them a call back. So I give them a number, try this number. So if there's anyone that has a story to tell, or if it's just something they want to share with me, please, kstafford@freepress.com.
Well, we're definitely going to push that.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it would be really nice, though, to tell a series of stories and to get a group of people together talking about their vision for the city and how they would spend $250 million if they had it. Because I'm not against raising it, right? I'm not against borrowing the money. But let's come up with some creative ways of investing that money to really, I hate the term blight removal because it's so negative, but to really reinvest in the communities where people live. I would love to work to try to highlight some of the visions that you see coming forth from our community. I know Chase has a number of people he's worked with. I work with a number of people. I know you know a number of people. Can we help balance the narrative coming out of the mayor's office that this is the only way to remove blight by giving other stories?
I think so. I think there's value. And again, when we first started talking, we talked about uplifting voices that are traditionally marginalized, that traditionally are underrepresented in the media. And I feel like that's what I've tried to use my position to do. So please, if people want to talk, send them my way. And, just quickly, one of the things that I hear a lot of questions about with this blight bond is what happens to the land afterward?
Now, that's a great question.
What's the plan for the land? One of the concerns that I've heard from residents, okay, is this land going to be packaged for developers? What's the play here? And how do we get to be a part of what's happening in our community? How do we get a piece of this land? So that's, for me, looking forward, that's the $1 million question. Multi-million dollar
So
question.
beyond the planning that Arthur Jemison says will happen, at the council meeting that Donna was just talking about last Tuesday, one of the council members asked the executive director of the land bank, who was present, what's the process for community members to obtain vacant land in the city of Detroit? And she said very clearly that there is no policy. Those were her words. There is no policy. She talked about the fact that, any request that comes outside of the buying the side lot program for lots that are next to your house, outside of those vacant lots, you have to submit a proposal. That proposal then has to go through land bank staff and then to the board of the land bank. So it's a case-by-case basis. There is no global policy set on how Detroiters can actually purchase that vacant land. So we're saying that we're going to demolish so much vacant land in the city, but yet on the other side, for neighborhood level developers, for Detroiters who want to develop their neighborhoods or community development orgs that want to get in that process, there's no legit policy.
There are so many examples of this.
Mm-hmm.
This one woman who is working in the living in the McDougal Hunt neighborhood has a beautiful home that she maintains. It's fenced. And she has adopted maybe 4 or 5 lots next to her that she gardens, puts flowers in. She's put a fence in there. Absolutely gorgeous. So she's been maintaining these lots and taking that burden off of the city for years, improving this neighborhood for years. She goes down to the city and says, I want to purchase this land. And rather than them selling it to her at a land bank price, they're offering it to her for something like $1,600. And this is a senior citizen on a fixed income who has given more than $1,600 in volunteer labor over the past however many years, invested way more than that in there. And she feels hopeless because any minute now, this land that she has been maintaining for over a decade can be taken from her. And it just beautifies the whole block. Rather than seeing value in what she's doing, there's this desire to extract something more from somebody who does not have more, and this thinking that we can't sell it to you at a different price. Around the block from her, there's another woman who is one of my heroes who decided she wanted to start a park. So she assembled 22 parcels of vacant land, assembled the labor to clear that land and clean that land. Then she got one of the grants for the playground. What is the playground grant? You know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Where you get the volunteers to come in, and they built this beautiful playground. And she's got a shed there, and she's got hours, and she's gotten funding from Detroit Future Cities to do a Mounds of Fun little use of the land. And she's got money from the Kresge Foundation, KIPD program to envision what that park might look like, hiring a landscape architect. So she submitted her request for more land from the city, and they didn't respond. And last week they responded and said, no, you have enough land. And I was just literally speechless. I said, we have to fight this. And believe me when I tell you the McDougal Hunt neighborhood has more than enough land to sell this one woman the land for $100 a lot, to sell this other woman the land that she's trying to build so that she can create a community park that she's calling Bailey Park off of It's a Wonderful Life. And yet she's getting the runaround, not because there's competition for the land, but because there's this fear. What they said is, we understand this neighborhood is going through a planning process, which it is, because this woman is helping to lead the planning process. And in our belief, her work is helping to catalyze future investments. But getting land from the land bank is really hard. So it just speaks to the devaluation of regular citizens. What the land bank will say is that we have a community partner program, and we work with nonprofit organizations, and so they'll sell us 9 lots if we go through a process every year. But this woman is a community partner. She has the 9 lots. She's trying to get, I believe, 13 more to complete her project, and it's in jeopardy right now.
See, that's a great example of looking toward, the future. What process will the city have in place when you have residents like this woman you're talking about who want to transform their own neighborhoods? There's a vision that's already in place, and, maybe residents don't want a vision imposed upon them. How do you make sure that what they want to see actually happens? And I have not heard enough discussion about that yet in terms of this bond. I feel like that when you think about it, that's a piece of this,
right?
Or it should be.
So one of the questions when this was still in committee, Councilmember Spivey actually asked very directly for some research on the dissolution of the land bank. He wants that as we vision for the future, when all this land is coming into the land bank, thinking through what happens when this comes back to the city of Detroit, when it's truly a city asset and not some quasi-governmental entity. So there is, on the Legislative Policy Division's site, there is a memo on that, but we need to talk about that more. We need to talk about who is controlling the land, and even for us to get information about who owns it, what the current status is, what the planning process is. When it's in the land bank, it's much more difficult to get that information versus if it was a city department.
Well, I think that, this is all important stuff. They're going to be talking about the Blight bond tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay. Will they be voting tomorrow?
They will not. So Council President Jones said that it's likely going to be postponed again because not all council members are going to be present at this meeting coming tomorrow.
Yeah. Yep. But I know Council Pro Tem Mary Sheffield sent out a note to residents urging people to come down and share their thoughts and opinions on the process. So we'll see what happens. I think the administration is supposed to give another presentation on it tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, one thing I would like to do is to make sure that the Detroit 21 gets heard. Mm-hmm. And my schedule is just really, 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 really tight. So I'm trying to figure out how I can get down there tomorrow to fit it in, because this is important. I think that anytime you raise $250 million in a city that persistently tells residents there's not enough money, you're in trouble. So I really want to thank you guys for coming here today. Both of you are 2 of my favorite, brilliant people. I love talking to both of you, and I love your passion and commitment to Detroit. I know this won't be your last time, either one of you here. Orlando is in Europe. He went to see Corinne Bailey Ray, but I got to sit down with Captain Chase, so I don't know, Orlando. Now, we always end this day with shout-outs to various people, just shouting out people and trying to recognize great work. And I really want to start by shouting out Wayne State University for the Heart of Detroit Scholarship. That really made my day when I read about it. I don't know what to say about those news media sources that have distorted the application requirements and all of the things required. You do not need a 31 on the ACT to go to Wayne State. That's U of M, okay? You don't need a 3.8 grade point average to go to Wayne State. That is also U of M. Wayne State actually has application admissions for struggling students. And as a parent of 3 college graduates, I wish my children had the Heart of Detroit scholarship to make the burden easier on me, okay? The thing about it, people say, well, you don't have to pay any money out of pocket to go to college in a lot of instances. What they don't talk about is the debt. I still have debt. My kids still have debt.
Listen.
And anything, I believe in free college, Heart of Detroit, hats off. And I really want to give a shout out to my board member, Patrick Lindsay, who is the Vice President for Governmental Affairs, and also my good friend, Kim Trent, who's the head of the trustee board. Any shout out, you guys?
So I want to shout out a great Detroiter who is paving the way for people to travel around the world, Jessica Nabongo. Who lives on the east side. She actually lives right over off of Jefferson.
Oh, we're going to have to get her in here.
Yeah. But she just became the first Black woman to visit every country in the world. And it's not just a vanity project, but I've seen so many other people who are inspired by her travels to travel as well. So definitely shout out to her for first showing that Detroiters do amazing things, because we all know what we do, but also just inspiring people internationally.
I don't have a specific person, but I'll say what I said on Facebook a couple of days ago. I just want to shout out every single person that has reached out to me over the past several weeks, just encouraging me to continue pursuing investigative journalism. Every reader matters, and I value everyone who supports me so much, so thank you.
Well, I always shout you out when you're not here. So let me shout you out while you're sitting here right now, Kat. I think you're doing an amazing job, and it is so exciting to me to see a young African-American Detroit woman, East Sider, taking on East Side. I don't know how to say it all right, but look, taking on the many. I appreciate you doing it well, but taking on the struggles and really, acting fearlessly on behalf of our community. And I want to shout out Chase, because Chase has volunteered his time to help a group of 21 nonprofits figure out how to become politically organized around something as important as the Blight bond. And, it's great because when people want to disagree on facts, I say, well, let me call Chase. And there's a lot of confidence in his legal knowledge and being the objective other, so that you're not just coming in because people know I'm so passionate. Sometimes it's like, okay, let me just make sure she's making sense. So thank you, Chase.
Always my pleasure.
And JG, thank you for letting us come in early. And, he brought his beautiful daughter in to try to accommodate our schedule. So we will see you next time on November 12th with Orlando Bailey back in the United States.